Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Carla Durand, and on behalf of the Collegeville Institute, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's presentation titled Play in Wisdom, Liturgy and the Liberal Arts. It is commonplace today to lament the commodification of education, particularly in the liberal arts. More than ever, it seems, some politicians, social critics, parents, students, administrators, and even some professors see education as a means to an end. Unfortunately, such a view of education not only restricts its scope, but it also stifles the human spirit. Tonight, our guest speaker, Collegeville Institute resident scholar, Dr. Brendan McInerney, will present an alternate view of the liberal arts as rooted in a theological account of play. Play, understood as those acts that are ends in and of themselves, is a fundamental aspect of human existence. It reflects our status as being made in the image of God. But how can we put such a strange vision of education into practice? Dr. McInerney will argue that ultimately it is the spirit of Benedictine liturgical practice that provides the key. Brendan currently teaches on our campuses in the CSB and SJU, Department of Theology. He received his PhD in systematic theology from Fordham University, his THM and MA in systematic theology from St. John's School of Theology and Seminary, and his history degree from St. John's University. Brendan, along with his wife Clary, is here with us tonight, and their daughter Eilish will be in residence at the Collegeville Institute through the end of this academic year. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Brendan McInerney.
So first, before I get going, I want to thank the staff and my fellows at the Collegeville Institute. Your generosity and insight have made this lecture possible. This lecture tonight, is part of a larger project on play and theology, and it is your guidance at the Institute that has helped me tying this project to a theme that I hope is of interest to everyone here. For those of us even somewhat in tune with the discussions occurring in higher education, that the liberal arts are in a state of crisis is likely well known. Even a cursory search for articles referencing liberal arts in the Chronicle of Higher Education, Inside Higher Education, The Atlantic, or any number of other outlets will result in a torrent of pieces recording the decline of the liberal arts and offering prescriptive advice, on how to bring about some sort of revival, or at least grow student interest in a liberal arts education. I do not intend to enter into a detailed assessment of such proposals, but three features of them are helpful in setting the stage for our discussion tonight. First, in most instances, the liberal arts and liberal arts education are terms left undefined. There seems to be an implicit assumption that all readers know what is meant, but on scrutiny, it can mean a number of things. Liberal arts might refer to simply a kind of education that demands study in multiple disciplines, or it might refer more narrowly to such an education that includes heavy emphasis on the humanities. Literature is almost always mentioned in these articles, along with history, and sometimes you'll see philosophy. Certainly, whatever else it means, liberal arts and liberal arts education does not refer to the medieval quadrivium of arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, and trivium, grammar, logic, and rhetoric. But any other unifying feature is lacking. Perhaps what is really being said is that liberal arts means something like those fields and curricula that are not exhausted in sciences, technology, engineering, and mathematics, even if these fields may find a home in a liberal arts education. If the first feature of the genre of educational writing is left vague, the second is not. In most instances, the challenge facing the liberal arts is named as consumerism, or the corporatization of the university. It is said that students and their parents increasingly see higher education as a business transaction. Money is exchanged for a degree, which in turn ought to lead to a good job for the graduate. And because colleges and universities face such heavy competition for tuition dollars, administrators and perhaps professors are often happy to meet the consumer demands. In such a setting, it's easy to see how STEM courses are recognizably valuable, but humanities courses are not. Having specific know-how in computer programming is a marketable skill after all, but the marketable skills gained in a modern Russian history course are far less obvious. This last point leads to the third feature I wish to highlight. Given that the issue seems to revolve around the consumer perceptions and preferences of students and parents, the standard liberal arts apology tries to simply change consumer perception. The defenders and reformers of the liberal arts seek to convince their audience that, in fact, there is or can be specific market value in this kind of study. Studying across the humanities, fine arts, social and physical sciences makes a student appealing to future employers. A student of the liberal arts, we are told, will be able to communicate clearly, think critically and creatively, understand, assess, and make sound arguments. As my older sister put it to me when she began her own academic career at a liberal arts education, the liberal arts teach you how to think, and employers like employees who can think. More ambitiously, the liberal arts are defended on loftier but less tangible grounds. To study in the liberal arts prepares students to be a good, informed citizen, endowed with the skills necessary to address the great structural ills of the day. One very recent online piece in the Chronicle of Higher Education ably condenses these arguments with an eye toward the growing jobs crunch. In How Robots Will Save Liberal Education, Eboo Patel argues that liberal arts education, marked as he states by building an ethical foundation that values the well-being of others, strengthening the mental muscles that allow you to acquire new knowledge quickly, and developing the skills to apply it effectively in rapidly shifting contexts. This kind of education, he says, supplies the very skills future job searchers will need for employment. For, as Patel explains, automation and artificial intelligence is set to push human employees out of many of the fields we now think of as providing long-term and stable careers. However, such automation, he says, will likely not replace work that involves managing and developing people, and work that emphasizes applying expertise to decision-making. In other words, says Patel, jobs that rely on human interaction, creativity, and judgment will continue to be done by actual human beings. Pressing his case further, Patel notes that human interaction seems to be necessary for human flourishing and democratic life. Patel concludes his article, people need interaction with other people to become better people, better citizens, and better employees. We have long relied on liberal education to produce such people, and all indications are that we will need it for many more years to come. We should pause here and consider what Patel has done. Patel places getting a job in human fulfillment, being a better human being, on at best equal footing. Indeed, it almost seems as if Patel makes human flourishing subordinate to a job. Human interactions make us better people, better citizens, and almost triumphantly, better employees. What a fortunate coincidence for ourselves and our bosses. Patel's rhetorical habits, his reduction of the liberal arts to a set of skills well suited for jobs, his weak and confused gesture toward higher things like democracy or human well-being are typical among the defenders of the liberal arts. In virtually every attempt to justify a course of study that rejects direct job training, the liberal arts are identified as a means to a particular end. The liberal arts are tools for some purpose. In Patel's case, even the ethical foundation the liberal arts provide is a job skill, and one apparently so hollow that those possessing it will happily accept a state of affairs in which their job security is made possible by an automation process that will leave countless others without work. I admit from the outset, and as you can probably tell, that such defenses leave me, I wrote here utterly cold, but I think it's kind of hot with anger. And I imagine that many of us can at least sense a certain impropriety in what's going on. But given the frequency of such arguments, we seem to lack a better vocabulary, a better framework for understanding just what the liberal arts are and the real value they hold. I believe the would-be defenders of the liberal arts are trying to fit them into a mold of thought based in practical or instrumentalist utilitarian concerns, which is incommensurable to the liberal arts themselves. What I want to propose tonight, therefore, is a different course. The liberal arts, I argue, are impractical by nature. They are rooted in what we can call play, not purpose. And it is in this that the liberal arts have their greatest value today. Liberal education allows us to step beyond the sphere of immediate, practical concerns and into the world of human freedom. What we require in order to reclaim this view, however, comes from outside liberal education as such. It's the liturgy and the vision of the creating God. Before jumping right into the concept of play and what it has to do with the liberal arts and the liturgy, I want to pause for a moment and examine why the liberal arts should find themselves in a precarious position to begin with, and in so doing gain a sense of why rediscovering their play character is of such importance. Clearly, it is not by accident that the interests of students, parents, administrators, and the defenders of the liberal arts should place the greatest weight on practical value. On one level, this can be understood as a natural product of the immediate historical context. Since the Great Recession, the middle class struggles to maintain itself, and for the first time in decades, there is a real threat of decline in standards of living from one generation to the next. The pressure on students to succeed, first in high school and then in college, in order to maintain, much less rise in economic standing, is tremendous. And as incomes in the middle class stagnate, tax revenues do too. State and federal funds become tighter, and the message from above is that colleges and universities ought to focus their shrinking resources on those schools, disciplines, and courses that will make students productive workers. Well, now it doesn't work. There we are. Marco Rubio put it succinctly, though with poor grammar, during a debate in the Republican primaries: we need less philosophy majors and more welders, because welders make more money or are at least in higher demand than philosophers. And, lest anyone think that this is a partisan prejudice, note that both Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton's desire to expand funding for higher education was justified as a means to make a more competitive American workforce. All involved discuss higher education as if it is merely a tool, a means to reaching a particular designed end, the middle class. However, the crisis of the liberal arts, I believe, goes much deeper than the immediate economic context. It reflects something of the contemporary mindset itself, a total frame of reference which celebrates purpose and work over means over ends, measurable progress and control over purposelessness, ends themselves, and the unknown and uncontrollable. This frame of reference has been given a number of names. It is the world of total work, utilitarianism, or late capitalism. But perhaps the most common and indicative name, and the one I will utilize this evening, is the technocratic paradigm. Now, the term technocratic paradigm has acquired a negative, largely political connotation, meaning something like rule of experts or bureaucratic rule. In common parlance, to be called a technocrat is now almost always an accusation or an insult in our populist moment. Marine Le Pen, the French politician, has made railing against the technocrats of the EU the hallmark of her political career. And while I have not taken any time to discover whether technocrat or technocracy is in his vocabulary, I think it is accurate to say that Trump's political persona and its appeal is based in an anti-technocratic attitude and style. As the etymological root of the word indicates, however, technocracy refers to a rule of technology, of technique. These terms share a common root in the Greek techne, a kind of knowledge of doing and making associated with craft and work, rather than pure disinterested understanding. Importantly, we should not assume that technology refers exclusively to high-tech products or even physical tools. Technology can refer to any object of human artifice that we use to augment our power over the world. In this respect, the technology of technocracy may correctly describe social structures just as well as computers. So as a paradigm, to speak of technocracy is to speak of a set of prejudices for determining human thought and action according to the logic of technology. Put otherwise, the technocratic paradigm imagines the world and things within it as complex machines to be directed to particular ends. This applies to inanimate things, such as natural resources, living creatures, animals, plants, what have you, and includes human beings. It is difficult to determine exactly when the technocratic paradigm achieved its current ascendant position. Certainly, it did not fall from the sky complete. It came in fits and starts, slowly replacing whatever paradigm we might call what that came before it. It is arguable, I think, to put its roots as far back as the European Age of Discovery and the early Enlightenment. But more narrowly, and I think with greater exactitude, it is fair to say that the paradigm truly comes into its own in the mid-19th century. It is in the 1840s and 1850s that the new possibilities of technology unleashed in the Industrial Revolution and celebrated and advertised in so many industrial exhibitions began steel and glass allowed human construction to take new and extraordinary forms. The steam engine broke the monopoly of muscle, wind, and current in human locomotion and the production of goods. Through the machine, human power over nature seemed potentially limitless. The success of such technology encouraged a distinct shaping of human imagination and language. We became accustomed to speaking and seeing things according to the model and standard of machines. As early as the 17th century, the world was described as a clock. In the 19th and early 20th century, the image of the factory arose as a particularly powerful one to describe human life and the human body. Today, we easily draw on computer and digital terminology in our day-to-day speech. We speak of being hardwired, for instance, or perhaps seek out a life hack to make daily tasks easier. More spectacularly, there are those today, philosophers, futurists, and entrepreneurs like Elon Musk, who argue that what we understand as reality is likely simulated in the sophisticated computer of a highly advanced civilization. That we're not base reality, that we're a computer program. It might be that we are inclined to think that these are mere metaphors or flights of philosophical fancy, but they nevertheless indicate and shape our imagination about the world, and therefore the possibilities of human action therein. Lest we forget, in recent historical memory, these kinds of metaphors and images made up part of the self-understanding of totalitarian regimes. The state as a whole and in its parts was a vast technology directed toward advancing the goals and aims of the revolution, the people, or the leader. Whole cities, such as the vast Soviet steel town Magnitogorsk, existed wholly to supply the needed raw materials for the use of a far vaster political, economic, and military machine. The technocratic paradigm thus exalts the standard of purposefulness above all others. A precise term, according to Romano Guardini, that which we call purpose is, in the true sense of the word, the distributive, organizing principle which subordinates actions or objects to other actions or objects so that the one is directed towards the other and the one exists for the sake of the other. That which is subordinate, the means, is only significant insofar as it is capable of serving that which is superior, the end. The purpose does not infuse a spiritual value into its medium. It uses it as a passage to something else, a thoroughfare merely. Aim and fulcrum alike reside in the former. From this point of view, every instrument has to prove in the first place whether, and in a second to what extent, it is fitted to accomplish the purpose for which it is employed. Put otherwise, purpose is the measure of a tool, and if the world is a machine, a factory, a computer, the world itself is a vast tool, a complex of means to some ends. The world is nothing more than an object of the human subject's mastery. Crucially, this mastery comes about through the application of human knowledge. It is not simply brute force. Francis Bacon's axiom, knowledge is power, is the technocrat's creed. And it is not a coincidence that, in the midst of the technological boom of the mid-19th century, the great thinker Karl Marx would assert that the purpose of philosophy is not to interpret the world, but to change it. Knowledge makes possible a more subtle and more efficient application of power. A hallmark feature of the technocratic paradigm is therefore an obsession with data, systems, and explanations. The more information available, it is supposed, the more likely we can grasp the system and direct it to our desired ends. Lest we imagine that the reach of knowledge is only the stuff of totalitarian dreams, just today I read that the tech company Samsung has issued a warning to their customers about private conversations held in the presence of their latest voice-activated television sets. As it turns out, the TV collects whatever its always hot mic picks up and then sends the data to a third party who can use it for product improvement and no doubt eventually personally tailored advertising. Or, we should say more accurately, advertising that has the appearance of being personally tailored. Information and data demand that the objects of study be divisible, broken down to their basic constituent parts to make the machine run smoothly. But this is not the same as an attentiveness to uniqueness. The unique is unusable. The parts must be interchangeable, or as interchangeable as possible. Therefore, the focus on parts is really a focus on uniformity, on the average. This makes possible more exact planning, greater order, and more efficiency. We can see in modernist urban design a perfect application of these ideals. The cityscapes of Le Corbusier would be harmonious environments, lacking overcrowding, traffic congestion, and the dissonance caused by mismatched structures and spaces. These are proposed plans for Paris, by the way. The human being in this vision would live on the straight line, the right angle, the geometry of human purposefulness, rather than the winding paths of the pack donkey and the curved lines of the barbarian. These are his terms. Better planning and organization implies in turn progress. Not simply a matter of technological development, which is a feature of human existence since the outset. Progress here is a self-conscious program and assumption. The development of more efficient technologies is always being sought and it is presumed to be continuous. It is not enough to build a machine or a tool that works. Its working can, theoretically, always achieve its purpose more directly. The technocratic paradigm cannot abide a final version. Think of the familiarity of the rolling out of new smartphones. We buy one of the most important tools we possess in the absolutely certain knowledge that within a year or two, a newer, better phone will come on the market. Or think of the endless and impossible promises of politicians. We are constantly being promised a better tomorrow, a brighter future. The right leader and administration will, somehow, usher in prosperity and justice through the manipulation of an administration and bureaucracy. As we are told, it is morning in America. Don't stop thinking about tomorrow. Hope. With this progress comes also the forgetting of the past, of history, of tradition, or what amounts to the same thing, the false, nostalgic reconstruction of it. Make America great again. Perhaps the best example of the technocratic paradigm at work is the industrial food system. Here we find all the aspects of technocracy deployed. Genetic engineering and patent laws provide for uniformity of seed and livestock. Progress in science and engineering drives deeper knowledge of genes, medicine, and chemicals, of more exact or powerful machines, of more efficient ways of processing, more automation, all paid for by ag corporations and taxpayers, but ultimately consumers of food. The physical landscape itself can be altered to maximize uniformity of place for better irrigation, whether by rerouting waterways or draining wetlands. As a result, yields are up and promise to always go up. Decay and rot are withheld, ensuring that food is not wasted. The desert itself is made fruitful by tapping deep aquifers. The food supply boom then provides the building blocks of countless food products, unnatural feed for livestock, and fuel for our vehicles. The whole system is designed to bring as much of the plant as possible to market. Environmental and physical health be damned. I raise the example of agriculture, not only because it is at once immediate to our lives, we all have to eat, and too often hidden from our consciousness, but also because it provides an example of the way in which the technocratic paradigm has lived beyond its most dramatic instantiations in totalitarian states. It's easy to see how the Third Reich and the Soviet Union could be identified with technocracy because of the way in which political powers sought to reorganize and refashion the whole of society to serve state interests. Under such conditions, and within those states opposing Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union as well, the paradigm seemed designed to build national power in order to defeat rivals. One still finds certain cold warriors defending capitalism not on the grounds of some innate goodness, the way maybe a libertarian or something might, but because the open market is credited with building and distributing wealth more efficiently than the government. In other words, the free market is a better tool for states to realize their various ends. But after the fall of the Soviet Union and the absolute geopolitical dominance of liberal democracy and capitalism, the technocratic paradigm takes a new form. Indeed, I would argue that it is once the purpose of nation states cease to be ultimate, that technocracy reaches its apex. That is, once you remove the purpose of nation states, now technocracy can really get going. For, as mentioned already, technocracy is about the logic of tools, the logic of purposefulness, the logic of means and not ends. Ends and debates about them are simply incompatible with the very rationality of technocracy. It thrives in a constant teleological deferral. End goals are never to be met, but only suggested, barely visible, just beyond our reach. There is always something more to be done, a better system, a more efficient mechanism to devise some better way to satisfy our desires. And no way to ask, what should we do? What are we aiming at? Technocracy today is thus driven by both endless production and endless consumption. The two poles put us into a kind of ceaseless economic revolution, a constant moving from one to the other. The object of our work, our productivity, is only rarely meaningful or even known to us. But it makes no difference because through work, we can amass capital, and with that capital, we can use the work of others in the form of goods and services. Our productivity, our purposefulness is directed only toward consumption. And advertisers know this and work mightily to steer us to their products. As a result, the temporal and physical fabric of our lives is simply filled with the items we have purchased or the entertainment for which we have paid. Indeed, we can understand this endless consumption is simply the means by which to solve the technical problem of free time and empty spaces. It is here, finally, that we come full circle and can fit liberal arts education into its fuller context. It is not fair to say that the plight of the liberal arts is caused by the consumerism or laziness of students, the hegemony of the STEM fields, or the administrative desire for a well-run operation. It is that all of these challenges reinforce and are reinforced by our contemporary imagination itself. Liberal arts education has become a consumer good to be standardized and well-ordered to maximizing the career prospects for graduating students so that they in turn might consume more as productive members of the middle or perhaps even upper class. It is no wonder that we struggle mightily to show the relevance of anything other than STEM courses. What does history, poetry, philosophy, or worst of all, theology give us that we can sell to an employer? Our ad hoc explanations about learning how to think or various other skills that the liberal arts study gives get us nowhere because we do not have an explanation as to why these skills should come from studying this content. I wish to be absolutely clear here. The grim picture I have painted is not born out of some hatred of technology. I'm only tempted to be a Luddite when my computer is not working properly. Rather, my critique is grounded in a concern for what the technocratic paradigm leaves out, and in leaving out causes us to forget or ignore. Our relationship with the world is mediated by the things we have created, and when those things are exclusively tools or consumer goods, or thought to be tools or consumer goods, we forget that the world and the things in it are not exhausted by our purposes. The question is then, is there another way of looking at things? I happen to think so. If we are attentive, we might find that we simply do not fit within the terms of technocracy. The food writer Michael Pollan recognizes that even so simple an act as cooking is one of rebellion against corporate technocracy. He writes, "In a world in which so few of us are obliged to cook at all anymore, to choose to do so is to lodge a protest against specialization, against the total rationalization of life, against the infiltration of commercial interests into every last cranny of our lives. To cook for the pleasure of it, to devote a portion of our leisure to it, is to declare our independence from the corporation seeking to organize every waking moment into yet another occasion for consumption. It is to reject the debilitating notion that, at least while we're at home, production is work best done by someone else, and that the only legitimate form of leisure is consumption. This dependence marketers call freedom." Pollan's description of cooking as a protest against these powerful forces raises an important question. Why would we do it? Why would we cook, for instance, if we do not have to? The question isn't innocent. To raise it and attempt an answer is to relativize the entire technocratic structure. To do something which you do not have to do is to step outside technocracy. It is to cast the value of efficiency and the demand that everything has clear purpose aside. It is to say that there are certain acts that are not means, but ends in themselves, and some objects, not tools, but something else. To speak in these terms is to enter a paradigm of human activity entirely different. It is to enter the sphere, not of purposefulness, but of play. You might now be thinking of playing fetch with the dog, your children playing make-believe, or even sports. But these are each only instances of a much grander reality. Play, I argue, can describe a great many things, including many things we do not readily associate with it. For our purposes, there are 5 characteristics of play to which I want to draw our attention. First, and most important, play implies freedom. It is never necessary. In the words of Johann Huizinga, one of the great play theorists of the last century, the need for play is only urgent to the extent that the enjoyment of it makes a need. Play can be deferred or suspended at any time. It is never imposed by physical necessity or moral duty. It is never a task. It is done in leisure, during free time. Only when play is a recognized cultural function, a rite, a ceremony, is it bound up with obligation and duty. Mandatory play is thus a contradiction in terms. If play is to occur, it only does so if the player willingly joins the game. Just as it cannot be forced by external pressure, play too is purposeless in the sense of purpose described above. That is, play is not subordinate to some superior aim which alone imbues play with worth. Play, in other words, cannot be used as a means to some external end. Now, it might be that this phrasing is out of sync with our common habits of speech. Sometimes we think of play as having a purpose. So another way to state it is that whatever purpose play has, it is fulfilled or even identical to the act of playing itself. What do I mean? Take the example of a contest game like curling. I don't know why I chose curling. Here we could say that there seems to be a clear purpose, winning. However, in those games like curling that include winning, this purpose is not really distinguishable from playing the game itself. In such games, we play to win. And if you're someone who likes to play to win and you find yourself playing with those who aren't playing to win, it can be mightily frustrating. Going further, we can also note that not all games entail a winner, and not all play is exhausted by games. On its broadest level, the only real purpose we could attribute to play is, as Huizinga suggested above, the purpose of enjoyment. We play because it brings joy. Or perhaps we ought to reverse it. We are joyful because we play. Second, as free and without purpose, play occupies a position in life analogous to ornamentation in architecture or fashion. Play is extraordinary. It interrupts the appetitive process. I didn't write that, someone else did. Huizinga wrote that. In play, the typical order of things is put on hold. Therefore, play is superfluous, an existential extravagance, a flowering of vital energy, according to Romano Guardini. It stands in contrast to our typical workaday mentality, which strives for efficiency in all matters. From a technocratic point of view, such descriptions are hardly positive. More than anything, play seems to be a terrible waste of time or resources. The technocrat, perhaps in the form of our bosses or in ourselves, can recognize the value of rest so long as it leads to more productivity. Daily, weekly, even yearly interruptions prove to be beneficial for work overall. Our bodies get sore, our brains get fried, and we cannot wait for lunch, the weekend, or vacation. More subversively, even wasting time at work is an efficient means for a wage earner to make money by spending as little energy as possible. Unless you get fired. The real difference between play and such work breaks or time wasting is that the latter are measured by the work, while the former simply is not. In technocracy, we rest so that we might work harder, but we do not play so that something else comes about. This difference might not always be obvious, but we can say that the internal logic of breaks and work is one of measured, finite resources, specifically the resources of our physical and mental energy. We do not really waste time in a break because this cessation of work is apparently necessary because of our limitations. And that is why within the technocratic paradigm, the human laborer is really always a temporary substitute for a machine that has not yet been built. The machine won't have to take a break. In the case of play, however, it interrupts the ordinary flow in a completely different manner. Because play lacks utilitarian calculation, it always possesses a certain lavishness. It is not a rest to store up energy or other resources, but to waste them without regard to cost. Play is a display of existential richness, not poverty. And this quality of pouring forth riches ties play together with festivity, celebration, and holidays, even leisure properly understood. In each instance, even if material wealth is entirely lacking, the sheer waste of time and energy to do something for its own sake makes it a manifestation of deep stores of liveliness. Play, in this sense, is far from being the possession of the leisure class. In its anarchic rejection of economic calculus, play subverts, or at least has the potential to subvert, the technocratic illusion that all things have a price. Despite the manner in which play overturns and interrupts the ordinary, play's third major characteristic is that it is nevertheless ordered, and in two respects. First, play occurs within particular frames, both temporal and spatial. Play has a beginning and an end, and occurs on a field or playground. This statement will have to be nuanced in a few minutes, but for the time being, I think it's an accurate description of our typical experience of play. Second, play lives by its own internal order. We can understand both of these aspects immediately when we think of formal sporting events. Sports have their kickoffs, first pitches, they have their final buzzers, or definite conclusions when all necessary conditions have been met. They occur on demarcated fields, and one must play according to rules. Even in less formal play, rules and order can abound. If you have ever played with a toddler, you may have gotten the sense of the importance of these unwritten, unspoken rules, even if you only know of their existence by virtue of your regular violations. Even fictional games like Calvin Ball, from the Calvin and Hobbes comic strip, in which the rules are entirely made up and constantly changing as Calvin and Hobbes play, prove the internal orderliness of play. In this case, the order is established by observing the made-up rules, even if they will be struck down in the very next moment. In some sense, the game is the making up of the rules. Importantly, rules of play are not subject to external explanation. Even if they change by Calvin and Hobbes or international sports agencies, rules are not established with any kind of absolute rationale. Put otherwise, the order of play is not one of external necessity. I cannot explain to you why there must be an infield fly rule in order for baseball to happen. Any explanation could appeal to the fittingness of the rule to allow better play, but that is the extent of it. Once again, this is a function of the freedom of play. The rules need not be exactly so, except by the free acceptance of the players. Fourth, play creates community. The evidence for this community creation is readily available to anyone who has spent any time in organized sports, drama, or music programs. It is almost impossible to imagine a scenario in which playing in such a manner could be done without forming bonds of friendship. And particularly in the case of sports, even the audience can be bound together as a community of fans. Why this is not entirely clear. Perhaps it is as simple as the sharing of a common goal or task for a time. But I'm inclined to think that it goes deeper than that. For surely, it is in the workplace that we more accurately share a common goal with our peers than in play, which is sometimes deliberately agonistic, so much so that it can even cause violence. But workplaces only occasionally deserve the label community. I think play can create such powerful bonds precisely because it is free, purposeless, and wasteful. In pure work, our identities are eclipsed by the tasks we are supposed to perform. We are fully taken into the technocratic paradigm and therefore are not really seen as free persons. One might even surmise that the contemporary white-collar office space is designed to create the sense of nameless isolation and interchangeability among workers. In play, by contrast, players are never simply parts, but free persons who have freely accepted the game and, crucially, have been freely accepted by the other players. There's real vulnerability in this mutual acceptance, for it carries the risk of rejection. What if no one wants to play with me? The other components of play already mentioned, that it is set apart from ordinary life but possesses its own internal order, also contribute to its creation of a community. Huizinga gives us some clue about the dynamics at work. He says, the feeling of being apart together in an exceptional situation, of sharing something important, of mutually withdrawing from the rest of the world and rejecting usual norms, retains its magic beyond the duration of the original game. It is not simply the free association of players that create community, but some deep magic in the game itself. I think this magic is the manner in which play creates its own world. Play has the makings of a fairy tale, in which everything hangs upon strict and strange rules. I know of no one who recognized this character of fairy tales better than G.K. Chesterton. The true citizen of fairyland, he writes, is obeying something that he does not understand at all. In the fairy tale, an incomprehensible happiness rests upon an incomprehensible condition. A box is opened and all evils fly out. A word is forgotten and cities perish. A lamp is lit and love flies away. A flower is plucked and human lives are forfeited. An apple is eaten and the hope of God is gone. The stakes of our playing are typically less dire, but here too play's order comes from beyond the players themselves. A game is forfeited when certain conditions are not met. A penalty is incurred when rules are violated. In play, we enter a world beyond our control and adopt its terms. It is inconceivable that those who freely choose to enter such a state would remain unaffected when they return to the world. They have accepted a great risk, the risk of loss or perhaps appearing foolish, and yet survived. The manner in which play establishes its own world suggests a final characteristic. Play can incorporate work in seriousness. Now, above I described play as an interruption in the ordinary flow of work, but that does not mean play cannot take work into its extraordinariness. What do I mean? Play can transform even drudgery into a game. Most immediately, we can think of the way in which children often play at adult activities. Playing house or pretending to work is on a continuum with really keeping a house or real work. What seems to distinguish the two most immediately is the sense that it is not for real. But perhaps on another level, what distinguishes is the frame within which the act occurs. Surely, we do know of the experience of meaningful work, which is not ever simply work, but something like play in the form of work. Meaningful work is work that has some kind of play character. Consider also the suggestion above that even so simple an act as cooking a meal when you do not have to is an act of rebellion against the technocratic paradigm. In cooking, we find many of the elements that would suggest it is not play. It is a purposeful activity, often composed of many organized steps. It has a definite and serious end in the nourishment of the body and is largely dictated by economics and finite resources. However, insofar as the contemporary economy and division of labor means that it is almost always a real possibility that the food industry can supply you with all you need for nourishment, even in the extreme forms of Soylent, which will replace all your meals for you, in a simple powder. Even in less extreme forms, the dismal trends in home cooking suggest that many people have seen the sense in avoiding their kitchen. We are simply too pressed for time to choose to cook on a regular basis. So therefore, to cook today means to engage in a superfluous, gratuitous act for which the only reason is the pleasure it brings us. That is, it is to play. I would go further, though, to suggest that cooking has always carried with it a ludic valence, this playfulness. It is harder to defend on the face of it because for most of human history, cooking has been a necessity for most people, and in particular women. Imagine a time without grocery stores, without gas or electric ovens, without refrigerators or even canning, and it is possible to get a sense of how much work cooking was. Nevertheless, there always seems to be an inherent lavishness and freedom in cooking. To cook means to transform the raw stuff of nature into complex new forms of elusive flavors and smells that we taste when we eat, even if we cannot always articulate them. To cook and eat thus strikes chords of deep pleasure, memory, and community. A bite of the right dish can flood your mind with a beautiful moment from your childhood. You are suddenly back at your family's Christmas celebration, devouring your grandmother's Swedish meatballs. A sip of wine carries the chemical memory of the soil, the sun, the rain, and the frost that the grapes experienced while growing, as well as the cultural knowledge of its makers. This is powerful magic. And that is why, even in its most humble forms, I think, cooking and eating may just be an occasion of a feast or a sacrifice, and therefore belongs in the realm of play. The example of cooking can stand for a whole host of human activities that can be understood according to purpose, but nevertheless resist the reduction to purpose. Language is not simply for the sake of information exchange, but also for metaphor and poetry. Our dwellings and our structures are rarely for the sake of their functions alone, but include decoration and other embellishments. Even our ancient prehistory, when humans struggled mightily to survive in the face of natural hardships, we find art. Poetry, art, architecture each bear the seal of human playfulness. And I would argue that human beings, as human beings, can never be wholly reduced to the status of purpose. We are always at play. Even in the most inhumane conditions, our playfulness comes through from time to time. This is a little sketch of a concentration camp that a Jewish prisoner made. If we accept that the relation of play and work is more complex than what meets the eye, then we might finally be in a position to see how the liberal arts might fall within the play concept or the sphere of play. Even if there is a lot of work involved, we can nevertheless apply each of the characteristics of play to liberal arts education. It involves temporal and spatial demarcations, often accompanied by ritual acts and clear physical boundaries of campuses. It almost always leads to the forming of strong communal bonds of friendship and loyalty to an alma mater. And it is a pause between more or less state-mandated education and entering the workforce. But most decisively, liberal arts education is liberal. That is, it is one that entails study for its own sake, study in freedom, and not because it serves some external purpose. The liberal arts were traditionally distinct from the servile arts, those disciplines of study that aimed at purposeful work. Perhaps it could be argued the classical liberal arts, the quadrivium and trivium, are far removed from the contemporary disciplines that can fall under the large umbrella of the term. So much so that the classical designation of learning for its own sake is either anachronistic or hopelessly romantic. Nevertheless, I believe the contemporary liberal arts education retains the spirit of its classical roots, so much so that the free mode of study is precisely that which defines a liberal arts education, regardless of specific discipline. That is, it's in the mode of free study that makes the liberal arts, and not necessarily any particular disciplines therein. Admittedly, when one is in the trenches of higher education, trying to carve out and defend our disciplinary territories in the face of a skeptical administration and student body, it is challenging to appreciate the implicit claim being made at any liberal arts institution, namely, that it is worthwhile, or better, meaningful, for students to learn in a range of disciplines and subjects, regardless of their specific content, whether the student finds them valuable, useful, and pertinent for a future career or not. Put simply, the liberal arts are taught and learned by being played. While we may not use the term much, what we are asking students to do alongside us in the liberal arts is to contemplate the truth of things, to receive wisdom where we find her. The stillness of contemplation and the busyness of play seem quite far removed, and both may seem miles away from the contemporary college. Nevertheless, the comparison of play and contemplation is not unique to me. Thomas Aquinas notes in commentary on a text from Sirach, consider how aptly the contemplation of wisdom is compared to play. There are two reasons for this, both of them found in the very essence of play. First, play gives pleasure, and in the contemplation of wisdom, there is the most profound pleasure. Secondly, the activity of play is not directed towards some other end, but is sought for its own sake. And this also holds true in regard to the pleasures arising from the contemplation of wisdom. Once again, the key which unites play and contemplation is purposelessness, leisure, pleasure in something for its own sake. To contemplate means to let reality be, to let it reveal itself to us, and for us to accept and affirm it, whether we can then put it to our use or not. Knowledge of the world in contemplation comes to us primarily as a gift, not an accomplishment. Liberal arts education, by moving us from one field of study to another, constantly reveals to us more of the truth of things, preparing us, we hope, to be lifelong learners, not in the sense that we will always be poised with minds ready to penetrate the veil of reality, to bend the world to our will, but rather as those with minds open, waiting to behold and delight in the innate mystery of things. These are not innocent thoughts, once again. They are claims about the nature of the human person and the world that stand in contradiction to those of the technocratic paradigm. To say the human being has a natural orientation toward contemplation, or ought to have an orientation to contemplation, toward the truth and mystery of the world, is to say, in that same breath, that she, the human person, can never be made into the instrument of another, that her dignity is higher than her purchasing power, that her life worth exceeds even any of her accomplishments. It is also to say that the world itself is something that exceeds the grasp of our intellects, that it is at root inexplicable, a miracle. Wendell Berry puts the contrast of these two ways of thinking with characteristic exactness. He asks, what can be explained? Experiments, ideas, patterns, cause-effect relationships, and connections within defined limits. Anything that can be calculated, graphed, or diagrammed, and yet explanation changes whatever is explained into something explainable. Explanation is reductive, not comprehensive. Most of the time, when you have explained something, you discover leftovers. An explanation is a bucket, not a well. And then he asks, what can't be explained? I don't think creatures can be explained. I don't think lives can be explained. What we know about creatures and lives must be pictured or told or sung or danced. And I don't think pictures or stories or songs or dances can be explained. The arts are indispensable precisely because they are so nearly antithetical to explanation. To picture, to tell, to sing, to dance, or, as I would say, to play. The play of human contemplation of a world that is beyond our grasp bears fruit in the play of human culture. If what I have proposed is sound, that there is a sphere of human activity that is irreducible to technocratic ends, and that liberal arts education properly belongs to this sphere, then we must ask, how can we live and educate as if this were true? As outlined above, the liberal arts seem to be remarkably impotent against the absolute claims of technocracy. Indeed, it is worth pointing out that even among those who wish to defend the importance of play for education, technocratic logic remains operative. You will find many articles about the value of recess for the learning outcomes among young children. So even play can be given technical purpose. Even play can be made into an aspect, just a part of total work. And if we need evidence to the extent to which play can be brought to heal, we need look no further than the hip, fun-filled offices of tech giants like Google, which use such fun in part to eliminate the need for workers to ever leave the office. If play is so vulnerable, even in its pure forms, is there any possibility to rediscover or reanimate the liberal arts as a whole with their play spirit? I don't have high hopes for the contemporary college. The college and university system is too well established, though frighteningly fragile, to take a different course because of a romantic notion that the liberal arts are meant to be played. No, on their own, they cannot realize this potential. Indeed, we need something more than ideas. We need practices. What is required is to reframe the liberal arts according to the terms of its kin in play, liturgy. That the liturgy is play, or at least entails much playfulness, is the argument of Romano Guardini in his seminal work, The Spirit of the Liturgy. Guardini's point is quite simple. The liturgy is not a means adapted to an external end. Its aim of glorifying God and sanctifying men and women is accomplished precisely in its doing. Even the moral or didactic elements of the liturgy are subordinate, for Guardini, to its playfulness. We do not gather exclusively to teach or be taught, for if that was the whole of it, we could certainly find far straighter avenues. No, the liturgy is best understood according to the claims of its major texts. We praise, bless, and adore God. We give him thanks for his glory. We gather, speak, sing, gesture, offer sacrifice of thanksgiving in order to gather, speak, sing, gesture, and offer sacrifice of thanksgiving. If the technocratic paradigm is constantly deferring ends, holding them out like a carrot, or even pushing them entirely out of our view to keep us moving forward, the liturgy frustrates by collapsing means and ends into each other. Even those elements we are most inclined to think of as didactic, say the reading of the gospel, we surround with singing, ritual movement and gestures, and the offering of yet more glory to God. Evidently, according to the ritual's logic, the reading is not primarily for our benefit, though we do benefit from it, but so that we might recount to God what God has done, our means of glorifying God being entirely provided by what God has already given us. Looked at from this point of view, the liturgy is rather frivolous. It is filled with similarly useless things, funny costumes and so forth. It is at best a decoration, an ornament of life. It interrupts the flow of the ordinary with its extraordinary character. For a set time and place, we step into a world populated by angels and saints whom we accompany in their ceaseless but useless praise. And that is precisely the point. We cannot identify any clear use for the liturgy because in it we reach an end, an eschatological landing site in which the questions of use or purpose are banished. As in other kinds of play, though, the liturgy does have an effect on us, but an effect that cannot be the aim in and of itself. What does it do? How might it shape us? Guardini answers. It is this very aspect of the liturgy that its didactic aim is to be found, that of teaching the soul not to see purposes everywhere, not to be too conscious of the end it wishes to attain, not to be desirous of being over-clever and grown up, but to understand simplicity in life. The soul must learn to abandon, at least in prayer, the restlessness of purposeful activity. It must learn to waste time for the sake of God and to be prepared for the sacred game, with sayings and thoughts and gestures, without always immediately asking why and wherefore. It must learn not to be continually yearning to do something, to attack something, to accomplish something useful, but to play the divinely ordained game of the liturgy in liberty and beauty and holy joy before God. To celebrate the liturgy is to learn the ways of beatitude by playing them. It is to live now according to the dignity and freedom we will possess in the kingdom of God. As Hugo Rahner argues, all play is in fact a kind of anticipation of the heavenly state, which will entail a perfect harmony of body and soul hinted at already in the grace of athletes and dancers. But it is the liturgy that is an immediate participation in God's game of grace. And because this liturgy is God's game, it is a game of the utmost seriousness. I think Benedictine monasticism is especially helpful in seeing how the celebration of liturgy might renew the spirit of play in the liberal arts. I have like 2 more pages. As St. Benedict regulates in his rule, at the designated signals, all of the work of the monastery halts so that the monastic men and women may perform the work of God, celebrate the liturgy of the hours. All work is to cease for the sake of the liturgy. Only on the rarest of occasions is the superior to dispense an inferior from putting down her work to pray in community. Only very rarely should they not be going to the hours. Now, on the lowest level, we might take inspiration from this rule and train our ears to hear the bells in our own communities. Day in, day out, at the designated signal, some men and women set aside whatever their work to play in the presence of God. The cessation of other occupations for the sake of liturgy might help train us to reorder our own priorities in academics. Even if we are caught up in vital interests, writing articles, advising students, working on various administrative committees, grading assignments, or teaching in the classroom, and therefore cannot attend the liturgy of the hours ourselves, the sound of the bells and the singing of the choir might remind us that our academic work does not exhaust our identities. But I think we can understand St. Benedict at a higher level yet. It is not the case that Benedict is simply contrasting the work of the monastery with the playful work of God. Play, as I've noted, is actually higher than the apparent distinction between play and work. It can incorporate work into itself. Benedict might have intuited this. As a clue, one can turn to his long chapter on the cellarer of the monastery. This is a position of hard work, though perhaps not for this cellarer. The cellarer is charged with managing the resources of the monastery. The cellarer, we might say, was positioned at the end of the monastery's complex economy. She or he guarded and distributed the final produce of all the other monastic work. Naturally, Benedict says that the cellarer ought to possess a good head on her shoulders. Here, if nowhere else, there was need of a person with workaday common sense to know and reach particular ends with the appropriate means, and not get fooled by other members of the monastic community when they want something. Nevertheless, Benedict also says that the cellarer will regard all utensils and goods of the monastery as sacred vessels of the altar, aware that nothing is to be neglected. Perhaps Benedict provides this as a figure of speech, intending only to scare cellarers into greater care. We can interpret it otherwise, however. And if we consider the self-sustaining nature of early monasteries, this other interpretation makes some sense. The produce of monastic work, whether agricultural or in crafts, could very well literally supply the liturgical vessels and the bread and the wine of the Eucharist. Even if the liturgy is set apart in space and time from the ordinary flow of monastic work, the liturgy truly incorporates this work into itself. Putting this differently, Benedict enjoins the cellarer to view things in this manner because Benedict saw the work of the monastery and the work of God as existing in hierarchy, not opposition. In this case, the work of the cellarer and all other tasks are measured by, flow from, and participate in the work of God. Put otherwise, we could say that the liturgical end of monastic work reframes all monastic work as liturgy. The liturgy and the work flow into one another. We can therefore understand the relation of liberal arts education and liturgy in a somewhat similar manner. Just as the cellarer must see his or her work as subordinate but participating in the liturgical glorification of God, so too can the liberal arts student or educator and all those charged with the administration and care of such institutions understand their rules as participating in the liturgy. That is why the bells ring, and at least some of us gather, even if we're caught up in other work. It is not only a reminder that we are not reducible to our academic works, but that these academic works are ordered to a more vital act, the praise of God. But this description of work in liturgy applies to virtually any work we might have. There's nothing unique in it to the liberal arts. There is, therefore, a final connection to be made between the liberal arts and the liturgy. As I have been arguing, the liberal arts might involve much work, but are never just work. They are the playful, receptive contemplation of reality which exceeds our grasp. But to say that the world is mysterious, that it is innately good, worthy of our study and reverence, is to say something about its cause. God is implicated, even if we wish to keep him behind the curtain, so to speak. This reflects a biblical claim about the God-world relationship, wherein God creates out of the freedom of his love. As Genesis states again and again, creation is good or beautiful, made to glorify God by the endless blossoming of its own life. This suggests that in the scriptural reckoning of things, creation is not a tool or technology for God, a means to some end imposed upon him, or even a means that, to reach some end that he imposes upon himself, but an end in itself. It is not by accident, therefore, that the biblical author of Proverbs should put these words in the mouth of divine wisdom. The Lord begot me, the firstborn of his ways, the forerunner of his prodigies of long ago. From of old I was poured forth, at the first before the earth. Then I was beside him as his craftsman, and I was his delight day by day, playing before him all the while, playing on the surface of his earth, and I found delight in the sons of men. Put simply, at least according to Proverbs, it seems that God plays creation into existence. Our active acknowledgement of this divine playing in our own ritual play of the liturgy makes possible an acknowledgement of it in the contemplation of the liberal arts. The liberal arts and the liturgy thus orient us to our nature as being in the image and likeness of God. To study without immediate regard for utilitarian purposes is to stake a claim that the human person herself possesses a dignity beyond her utility, beyond her place in the consumer economy, beyond her socioeconomic status. It is to declare that we are not valuable the way a well-designed and useful machine might be. Ours is a holy dignity, worthy of reverence. We are those made to see the signature of love indwelling, to play with divine wisdom on the surface of the earth in the presence of God. And in this is our delight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brendan. Let's take 10 minutes of questions or comments or conversation, and we'll try to use the mic just because it'll feed into the recording.
Thank you. Forgive me if I've misunderstood you here, but I'm uncomfortable with the framing of this problem as liberal arts or technocracy, liberal arts or practical career development.
Yeah.
I mean, I would recommend the Economist from about 6 weeks ago. The issue on higher ed says that the best way for higher ed and industry is to sit at the table together and work on each other's problems. Can't higher ed walk on two legs?
Yes, yes, I think so. And I think, once again, Benedictine monasticism does provide a nice model because Benedictine monasticism has such a huge place for work. You know, even physical manual labor is an incredibly important part. Benedict doesn't look too highly, or doesn't think too highly of those monks that aren't working very hard. So yes, absolutely. We can bring work and the professions and technology and so forth into the conversation, but the problem with technocracy, I think, is that it places the model of problems and solutions, means to ends. It sort of blocks out ends themselves, and then we end up struggling to explain very intimate and meaningful things in human life, like art and music, dance, play, so on and so forth. But I mean, I take your point. Yeah, it's not to banish work or servile arts or something like that from consideration.
Brendan, thank you. This was stunning. Really stunning. And I have a question that's similar to the last one. And it's really more that I'd like you to help me, because I'm a convert. The liberal arts is an end in and of itself. Nothing else needs to be said for me. But it seems at times, equate that with purposeless is very difficult for me. To use the liturgy as play is absolutely fabulous. But to consider that purposeless is difficult for me. I would consider, for me, if something is an end in and of itself, it is the most meaningful, purposeful,
Yes.
teleological thing ever.
Yes.
Praise of God is wholly, completely, and utterly meaningful, not purposeless to me. So just help me to get there.
Yes. So one element that's not in the lecture is that Guardini, and when I follow Guardini, using that term purposeless, he is contrasting purpose with meaning. That something that is meaningful in and of itself, by virtue of being meaningful in itself, lacks a purpose. It's not a tool to some exterior end, and that's what makes it meaningful instead. So this is a technical point, whether it's from a German speaker, whether it's strict to German language, or if it's simply Guardini's invention to make this contrast, that does cut against the grain of our own habits of speaking. Like you say, there's great purpose in the liturgy, there's great purpose in the liberal arts, but I think Guardini's technical point is that you can say that, but what you might be really meaning is that it's meaningful in itself, that it's not a means adapted to some external end, like job preparation or something like that, or in the case of the liturgy, it's not a means adapted to the end of ethical formation, even though it forms us as ethical individuals or as holy individuals. Does that make sense?
That clarification helps a great deal. Thank you.
I'm sure Ben has a question about exactly that thing.
This afternoon we had the funeral for Father Magnus. He's world famous for his polyhedra. And for the last 50 years of his life, until the very last day of his consciousness, he made hundreds and hundreds of polyhedra, completely useless. But he found delight in showing the relationship between form and mathematics and geometry. And that's the way that God created the world.
Brendan, I just want to say thank you, first of all. It was immensely illuminating, especially for the first pieces. But I found myself getting increasingly skeptical as we moved toward especially the liturgy, particularly when you began speaking about the purposelessness, or at least what the ends of the liturgy might be identified as, particularly the practices housed therein. And I reacted strongly against that, because if practices are treated as the ends, those who practice are not. And I'm wondering how you might save what you're doing here from either idolatry or a way of practicing liturgy that gives into the temptations of injustice so that the practice might be more pure.
It's a very good question. Well, I think if we consider that the ends of liturgy are the glorification of God and the sanctification of men and women, perhaps in that we are avoiding the temptation, as you say, to idolatry of maybe the ritual structure and so on and so forth, certain kind of liturgical rigorism or something like that. So I think that might help, but I think your point is quite sound and something that I'll have to think about more.
Want to get a drink soon?
Yes, yes, I do.
Thank you very much, Brendan. I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about how this view of the liberal arts has affected your practices as a teacher. I have in mind the fact that even like the way you structure a syllabus is nowadays so determined by these sort of technocratic objectives.
Yeah.
Are there ways that you in your own teaching are sort of trying to push back against that to make the classroom a space of play?
I have a habit. When it comes to making a syllabus and doing those sorts of things, that's very work-oriented and purposeful kind of activity. You know, these are the skills that you will learn, and so on and so forth. And you want to make sure that the syllabus is well ordered and flows and everything like that. And that, yeah, when you're in the classroom, you are delivering the content. I have a habit of starting each semester, however, by telling my students that what they are going to learn in the class may not be of immediate use to them. That a lot of what I teach is something more akin to trivia than, I don't know, something that will make them better healthcare providers or something like that. The point, I hope that that sort of warning at the outset of class doesn't just disappear and dissipate, and they can't recall for the life of them why they would care about 4th century Christology or something like that. But more on a broader scale, I think it's also inviting them into the discipline of theology, to sort of step into the world of theology on its own terms. And so to me, it's very similar to someone who would demand that in a literature class that you read and comment and interpret the work based on what the work itself says, not trying to put the poem or whatever to your own purposes. I don't know if that works. I don't know if that's effective, but maybe that's for the best that I don't know if it's effective, because then I would be too technocratic or something.
Can I ask a really quick follow-up? So do you see yourself as a player or a referee then in the classroom?
As someone doing intro theology courses primarily, mostly a player. It's a game. It's a game of people on, though we're not on complete equal footing, because of course I have to grade them and so forth. My students do see me do a lot of impromptu theologizing and so forth and playing at it. Yeah. At least I think so. Yeah.